Okay, part 3, conclusion 2, the difference between sports and combat related self protection skills in martial arts. Okay? So, again, the point about danger in the martial arts is how and when you can prepare yourself. Okay? So, if you practice judo, for example, you can prepare yourself to fall on a mat properly. I would not practice break falls the way judo guys do for falling in the streets. Just my own personal preference. Just had to throw that out there. But you have some control over that. In a life and death situation, you don't, which is another reason why those training procedures have to be so programmed into your subconscious, your responsiveness, okay? Because you may be having the worst day of your life. You may be feeling physically horrible, and you have to find a way to either die or deal with it. There's no out for that, okay? And it's reflected in the sense that you have to use your body's natural preparation systems much more efficiently, okay? When you're fighting in the ring, adrenaline is a very short supply drug, okay? You have it occasionally, but you can burn yourself out trying to fight on adrenaline. Whereas when you're in a street situation and life and death is on the line, you don't think of it quite that way, okay? You don't want the situation to prolong. You have to understand certain things, which we'll get into next. And you have to use all your faculties because you're going to probably not be at your best. It's a given. Otherwise, why would somebody attack you in the first place? Okay? When people attack to kill or to take or whatever, they're trying to find an advantageous position to do so from. Okay? So, big part of martial arts is also understanding that and dealing with it appropriately and how you carry yourself. And the next big thing, which is weapons. Okay? Now, you have a whole bunch of issues related to weapons. And a lot of weapons training in traditional martial arts are comprehensive enough that you can utilize them for self-protection and training with those skills. However, you have to really take them and reformulate them. Okay? And the reason for that is because in any real situation, the primary consideration is distance. And you're never going to get into one of these situations where you're in a predefined range and trying to do some very quick hand movements against somebody with a weapon who's trying to kill you. Okay? It doesn't work. It's not what they would do when those things were practiced to teach certain aspects of coordination and development. Unfortunately, a lot of teachers don't understand that if you just do those things in a kind of a vacuum, these drills that you stand in one place and you're teaching bad habits, okay? You need to understand that when you start to use weapons in a combat scenario, distances have to be controlled impeccably, okay? Impeccably. Which is why, if you look at a Japanese, well, let's take an art like the Bujinkan, Kukishin Ryu, okay? Kukishin Ryu, you're going to get arguments as to what kind of designation it has. But assuming it's old, and assuming it's Koryu time frame, look at their weapons katas. They look laughably simple because they're learning about the most important aspect, which is if somebody has a stick, a big stick, a long stick, and somebody has a sword, the thing that is most important is the distance. That's what you have to learn before you start doing anything else, okay? before you start messing around with different cuts, different aspects of technique, you need to establish maintaining the proper distance to your opponent. Okay? So the core you start from a very simple basis because they're really very complicated. Because you trying to maintain those proper distances, try that against somebody who's trying to cut your ass or hit your ass, and then you'll understand why they do that. Okay? Now, I use that as an example because when you start using things like knife, there are some wonderful teachers like, I think it's Robert Redfeather. He's a Native American teacher. And what I love about that guy and his student Robin, you can look this up, you'll catch it on YouTube. They don't deal with a lot of crap. They deal with distance. And he shows you when he's cutting, he keeps moving. Okay? That's real. Okay? Even in a dueling art, okay, you have to understand that concept if you don't want Aiuchi, the term for mutual death in combat theater. Okay? If you don't want Aiuchi, you get the guy and he gets you, you have to understand distance. Okay? So 90% of your training should not be, okay? It should be how you maintain your setup with your weapon to your opponent. And you can see this in boxing too. If you want to watch a great fighter, watch Andre Ward. And you'll notice something with Ward. Ward is one of those guys that after he hits you, he's thinking about where he's going to go next. Okay? He'll make his counter and he'll move. Okay? He'll move offline at an angle away from the guy. Very important concept. Okay? Very important. And part of the ideology of training with weapons is a little different because I don't know if it's a lot of teachers, but I can tell you from my experience as a teacher, if I can teach you how to understand sword, distance, timing, and how to use that weapon, then you can deal with a punch, okay? Not that I'm not going to show you how to deal with punches or, if you're in a ring against a boxer, how can you deal with that? But the point is that if you have some understanding about where you absolutely cannot get touched with a weapon and you practice that way, you've already started with a good set of base habits, okay? And so weapons is a very big part of training for combat-related activities, and most people don't understand the real reason for that. The real reason being you control distance and timing properly when you learn how to use weapons that take a lot of training. And it also applies with firearms, okay? Don't think for a minute that a firearm does not involve those same skill sets, okay? All weapons involve distance, timing, okay? And the same considerations, okay? Whether you're trying to take cover from a punch or from being shot at, you're taking cover. Just as you shouldn't ever actually play defense, okay? If you do this, you're not doing that to block a punch, you're breaking his arm, okay? Same thing in a situation where guns are involved, okay? The more that you act defensively in your actions, the more chance your opponent has to act offensively, okay? Doesn't mean that you don't protect yourself. It means you do it a certain way, okay? Let me see if I can put that another way that makes a little bit more sense. If you are going to get punched by somebody, would you rather them have their feet set, or would you rather have them off balance and going backwards, okay? Part of the skill is understanding that making that person off balance, okay, is a form of self-protection. You can call it defensive, I don't, okay? I'd rather push you off your center if you're a boxer, so if you hit me with something, and you hit me in my head and break your hand, you're going backwards, okay? You're not set for your punch, okay? So I'm not going to try there and try to block your punch, okay? There's no way that's going to happen anyway. Okay? But you understand, the reason I'm enunciating this particular idea is because I want you to understand that your whole mindset and with your training levels to the game. Okay? You start out defense, offense, and then you learn that that's all a joke. Okay? When I lived in the Buddhist monastery, there was an old saw that you came in the monastery and the mountain was a mountain, the stream was a stream, and the saffron rows were really gorgeous and all. They didn't wear saffron robes, I'm being a wise ass. Then you trained for a year or two or maybe 5, and suddenly the mountains were these magical concoctions that all flowed together with the streams and the robes. Everything was one. And then you trained for 10 years, and the mountain was just the mountain again. The stream was just a stream. Okay? The point is, it's called the stink of enlightenment by some, whatever you want to refer to it as. It's the same fundamental point, okay? There are levels to the game, okay? And when you're training for self-protection, you start out, if you're doing it half-assed, then you start out at the lowest level and you just don't ever involve yourself in a situation where you have to take risks a lot of times. And okay, if you start training when you're 50, that's fine, okay? If you train self-protection after you've understood these other elements, then you have to train at the highest level of proficiency, okay? You have to create good habits reflexively. You have to have a mindset that will not be turned because of things that turn most people's stomachs and panic people, okay? You have to understand very complicated and intricate concepts of distance and timing, okay? And how to be deceptive in your approach. Deception is very difficult to exercise reflexively, okay? It can be done. You have to learn about weapons and how to actually use them, okay? Not just simply do things that look good in a demo, okay? So let's understand now that when we're talking about all these attitudes you hear about, be very critical, self-critical, most important. Be hardest on yourself. Then when you want to look at others, you don't have to tolerate when people are saying things that are silly, okay? Especially not intelligent people, okay? People that should know better. And understand that it's very easy for people to create opinions and attitudes that are wrong and false, okay? Based on a common denominator. Most people, they don't really challenge themselves in life, much less martial arts. And they get comfortable doing one thing a certain way, and they've got their manna from heaven, and that's the way it's done. Not because it's just the things they're comfortable with. Most people don't put themselves in situations where they're uncomfortable and will get challenged legitimately, okay? And people that do that and teach, it's very disturbing to us when we see people parrot these silly misunderstandings that martial arts is all about getting in a ring and fighting, okay? Getting in a ring and fighting is a part of martial arts when you have the luxury of training at an age where you can do that, okay? And it's a great thing to do. It should be part of your training, okay? It's not the entirety of training. And the entirety of training involves very complex, reflexive movements and habits that you learn through training and through understanding distance, timing, and intent, okay? And I'll conclude that with this.